Today we're going to talk about adding and subtracting polynomials. This is similar to combining like terms, but sometimes we have whole polynomials that we want to add and subtract from each other. So before we move on to adding and subtracting polynomials, we just want to do a quick review of combining like terms. So again, like terms have the same variable with the same exponent. When we combine them, we are either adding or subtracting like terms. So let's look at our first example. Notice here that 5x squared, I'll match my color to their color, 5x squared and minus 2x squared, those are like terms. So the quadratic terms can be combined to negative 7x squared. The linear terms are 5x, negative 8x, and negative 1x. So when we combine those terms together, we get minus 4x. And finally, we have a minus 15 at the end and a plus 11. When we combine those terms, we get negative 4. Sometimes we get more complicated expressions that actually aren't considered polynomials, but you will see some problems where you have to combine more complicated terms. In this example over here, 4x squared and x squared are like terms. That gives us 5x squared. And we have a 14x, which is certainly not the same as x squared. But then we have these strange xy terms. Since the variables x and y are different variables, that would not be considered like terms with x or x squared. But these two terms do have the same variable, 3xy and 7xy, and that adds to 10xy. So let's take a look in the context of combining like terms. Our first example is a polynomial, and the second one is a little bit more complicated. So in our first example, I have a negative 3x squared, and I'm looking for other terms that have x squared as the variable, and I see one over here. So my first type of term is an x squared term. Then I see an x term, 3x, and a 6x. Those are like terms as well. And then I have a negative 1 by itself. So in my final answer, I'm going to have the x squared terms come first. I'm going to stay in standard form, then the x terms, and then at the end I'll have that negative 1 by itself. So negative 3x squared plus 4x squared is 1x squared, or just x squared. Three x plus 6x is 9x. That's positive because my coefficient of 9 is positive. And then finally, I have my minus 1. Again, if you want to ignore that 1, you can write it as x squared plus 9x minus 1. In our next example, this one's a little more complicated. Again, this one would not be a polynomial. We have an x squared term here. I'm going to look for more x squared terms. I find one here. I'm going to look for terms that have a y squared, but I just have the 1. I have just one x term, and then I have a constant term of negative 8 by itself. So here I'm going to end up with 4 different terms. So my first term would be 3x squared plus 3x squared is 6x squared. Then I have my blue term plus 4y squared. Then my minus 4x, and finally my minus 8. Again, those two 3x squareds turned into 6x squared when I combined my like terms. So now that we have combined some like terms, we are going to try to add and subtract some full polynomials. So now we're ready to add and subtract full polynomials. Just be careful that since these parentheses aren't touching each other, that means that there's an operation. We are adding these terms and these terms together. So when we're adding, we really just need to write each of the terms separately. So I have x squared plus 4x plus x cubed minus 4x squared plus 1. And now we're just in a situation where we're combining our like terms. So I have an x squared and a minus 4x squared. I just have the 1x cubed, just the 1 4x, and just the one constant 1. So when I rewrite my polynomial, I have x cubed. I have two sets of x squared terms. So 1x squared minus 4x squared is minus 3x squared. I have one x term or linear term, and I have one constant term of 1. So when we're adding, it's pretty simple to add the terms together. We don't need to worry too much about that plus because it doesn't change the signs. Where we really need to be careful is when we are subtracting one polynomial from another. So the first polynomial we just have, it's just x cubed minus 4x squared plus 1. But my second polynomial, I am subtracting each of these terms. So I need to think of this as subtracting a positive x squared and subtracting a positive 4x. So notice that that is a subtraction here of a positive x squared and a subtraction of a positive 4x. This is where we really need to watch out. Now we're ready to combine our like terms. So I'm going to highlight my like terms. I just have the 1x cubed. I have minus 4x squared and minus another x squared. I have a 1 and I have a minus 4x. So now I'm ready to rewrite my polynomial in standard form. My highest degree is a 3, so x cubed. Next I have two quadratic or second degree terms, minus 5x squared. Then I have my minus 4x and my plus 1. Notice I made sure that my degrees went from highest at the 3 to lowest at none of the x's. The toughest type of problem we get is when we are subtracting one polynomial from another, but that second polynomial has subtraction in it. And this is where we have to be extra careful. So again, our first polynomial is just x cubed minus 4x squared plus 1. But now we are subtracting x squared, but we are also subtracting a negative 4. And remember that subtracting a negative is equivalent to adding that value. So I really have to be careful with this subtraction sign and this negative sign. That gives me a positive or an addition of positive 4. Now I'm ready to combine my like terms. So I have x cubed. I have two x squared terms. And this time I have 1 plus 4 instead of minus 4. So just to review, today we learned how to add and subtract polynomials. We were really careful when we had to subtract polynomials involving a negative to make sure that we changed the sign anytime we were subtracting a negative.